Hi, everybody. Today is Wednesday, February 26, 2025, and our friend Alex Krainer is back with us. Welcome back, Alex.
Good to join you again, Nima. Greetings to everyone out there.
Let's get started, Alex, with the foreign policy of Europe. And we had a meeting between Donald Trump and Emmanuel Macron. What was the outcome of that meeting, in your opinion? What has happened at that meeting, and what would that mean for the conflict in Ukraine?
I think that very close to nothing happened during that meeting. They met. Um, Donald Trump made the gesture of not welcoming Emmanuel Macron at the entrance to the White House. So that was a symbolic gesture of how much he values that relationship. They held a slightly awkward press conference afterwards in which Emmanuel Macron, I would say, kind of rudely interrupted Trump in delivering his remarks, but Trump didn't get very excited. In essence, he issued a condescending rebuttal to Macron's fantasies that maybe somehow Russia could be persuaded to put up their money to reconstruct Ukraine. And Trump said, well, if you believe that, I'm okay with that, which is a polite way of saying I have a bridge in Brooklyn to sell to you. And off he went, Macron, to back to France. I think he achieved exactly nothing, even though what he hoped to achieve, and what I think Keir Starmer will hope to achieve, is to get the United States back on board, because without the United States, all is lost. Uh, Last week they held the emergency summit in Paris. The select uh, European warmongering governments, and they were clearly completely vexed about the change of course by the Trump administration. Um, it's as close as it gets to panic in international relations. And I think that the mindset of that meeting was given away by European Union's foreign minister, Kaja Kallas, who issued a statement on X saying that, in a message to Marco Rubio, that we shouldn't allow the Russians to divide us. In other words, please don't go talk to the Russians, and don't reestablish friendly relations. Let's keep on waging war, supporting Ukraine until the last Ukrainian, and hope against hope that somehow the situation can be turned around. Nobody hopes that Ukraine might prevail, but the longer the war continues, the better the odds that something might happen, a miracle that could maybe destabilize Russia, economic problems, Vladimir Putin having health problems or dying, some kind of a miracle. So they don't want to stop the war. They are so desperately invested in this war that they will try to do anything to stop it. But as Keir Starmer said in the aftermath of that emergency summit in Paris, he said that the U.S. backstop is essential. Without it, it all crumbles. And so now I think they're going to Trump one after the other to try to somehow persuade him to rejoin the effort. Uh, and I think it's not going to work, because the Trump government can read the writing on the wall. Ukraine lost, Russia won. Russia has all the cards to play, and for the United States, it's a practically a no-brainer decision to cut their losses and then talk to Russia, because there's a lot of stuff that they can do with Russia, and the Europeans and the Brits have very little to offer. It's only the downside, whereas in talks with Russia, there's plenty of upside. So for Trump and his people, I think it's a relatively easy decision.
I don't know if we had, instead of Donald Trump, we had a Democrat, Kamala Harris, for example, in office in Washington, the situation could have been that much different in terms of the reality on the ground, Alex. You know, the, the reality is that the situation in Ukraine is collapsing, and the foundation of that strategy that wanted to strategically defeat Russia has collapsed. And here comes the way that Europeans are trying to deal with the situation. On one side, they know what's going on in Ukraine, but they want to keep the facade, what has been going on in the mainstream media be, among the politicians in the West. The problem with Donald Trump that they're facing with Donald Trump, Donald Trump says it that the Ukraine case is done, and we're not going to be involved in Ukraine. This is the problem. They don't want to accept it publicly that they cannot do anything for Ukraine. Here, do you think that the problem is on the surface or below the surface is going on as well? Because they, do you think that Europeans really believe that they can save Ukraine, they can do something for Ukraine, but the policy of continuation of the conflict?
Well, it's all a matter of belief, and belief is a wonderful thing. You can persuade yourself of anything. To answer your question about if Kamala Harris was in the White House, yeah, the situation would be very radically different. There would be a continuation of the war. It wouldn't even be much of an issue. But the and I'll use harsh words, but I actually thought it through. With Kamala Harris and the continuation of a DNC neocon government, you would have basically a government of degenerates and morons running the show in the United States. And such people can be persuaded to believe whatever you need them to believe. And what's going on under the surface, and this ties into this contrast between, government of savvy operators versus government of morons. It's obviously all about resources. It has nothing to do with freedom and democracy. The biggest cheerleader for this war is the United Kingdom, where you can get arrested for silently praying on the street or for singing kung fu fighting, literally. So that's no land of liberty or human rights. Same could be said, only much worse, about Ukraine, which also has an illegitimate leader whose presidential term has expired. It's about resources, and Ukraine has some. According to Senator Lindsey Graham, they're talking about $12 trillion. I believe that Trump's seemingly transactional approach to this problem of demanding the commitment of these resources to the United States is actually Trump trolling the United Kingdom. See, what happened, according to leaks from Ukrainian intelligence, is that Zelensky has been demurring and hesitating and shifting around on the issue of these resources because he already committed them to the United Kingdom, to Britain. And this apparently happened on the occasion of him and Keir Starmer signing the 100-year partnership agreement between Ukraine and the United Kingdom. allegedly, this agreement contains a secret appendix uh, whereby the Zelensky signed over Ukraine, all of Ukraine's ports. So the provision is that upon cessation of hostilities in Ukraine, Britain would take control of all of Ukraine's ports, all of their natural gas deposits, storage facilities, and pipelines, titanium deposits, and on and on and on. So basically, he signed over Ukraine's resources to the United Kingdom. This was published by a Czech portal called AE News, which apparently is quite well informed. And I read into the 100-year agreement, which you can find online at ukgov.uk. Something, it's not difficult to find. And when you read that agreement carefully, it makes it plausible that this is in fact what happened. So the question of these resources is not a new thing that Donald Trump just thought up in a acute attack of pathological greed. This is something that Zelensky put forward to him back in September, before Trump was even elected, because he was afraid that if Trump gets elected, that Ukraine might likely lose the support of the United States. So he went to New York, he met with Trump. This was towards the end of September. And he made this proposal, continue backing us, and I'll offer you Ukraine's resources in compensation. But, when the Brits got the wind of this, they rushed to preempt Trump. And so the 100-year partnership agreement was signed on the 16th January. Keir Starmer went over to Kiev with this agreement. It was signed there. This was only 4 days before Trump's inauguration. And so now we have this diplomatic incident where, Zelensky promises something one day, then he talks to the media and says exactly the opposite, insults Donald Trump, embarrasses the Secretary of State Rubio, and basically antagonizes the very party whose support he's desperate to keep. So how to explain this? How to explain that little dictator Zelensky is antagonizing the United States and he's desperate for the US support? The explanation, I think, is the role of the United Kingdom, which I exposed this in a number of articles I published on Substack. The United Kingdom is in a catastrophic fiscal situation. They're desperate for collateral to float up their financial system. And so they wanted to grab at Ukraine's resources. This would be the collateral that could, fuel another large-scale credit cycle. But, I'm certain, to me, it's inconceivable that Trump and his team are not aware of this. I think they're completely aware of this. And I think that Trump demanding these resources is actually Trump trolling the Brits. And at the same time, he was saying that President Zelensky is a dictator. And then there was a hysterical reaction to that statement in the UK. Why? Because Zelensky signed that 100-year agreement. And if Zelensky is not the legitimate leader of Ukraine, he's not the legitimate representative, then his signature on that agreement is worthless. So suddenly, all of the UK media and Keir Starmer and Nigel Farage, who is, the controlled opposition of the City of London, they all jumped to the defense and said, like, no, he's not a dictator. He's a duly elected Ukrainian president. Well, it's irrelevant what they think. Ukraine has a constitution. It's the supreme law of the land, which says that the presidential term is for 5 years and cannot be extended for any reason. It doesn't make any provisions for skipping elections, delaying elections, extending the president's term for even 1 day. So he's under Ukraine's constitution. He's not the legitimate leader. So now, Keir Starmer has to rush to the United States, talk to Trump, and beg him to back off. And I'm sure that he's going to say, like, leave all these Ukrainian resources in the British capable hands. We'll make sure that you're happy with as well, and we'll, bring some U.S. corporations to help develop all this and share the cake. But please don't take this away from us. And then, that's also the reason why Keir Starmer was so keen to offer UK troops for Ukraine, the so-called peacekeepers, and then they changed the name to reassurance forces or something like that. And I think that they did this because if they called it the tripwire forces, it would be maybe a bit too obvious. The reason is, if you want to control the resources, if you want to make sure that those resources remain committed as collateral for your banking system, you need the ability to enforce those agreements. And so you need peacekeepers. So the Brits volunteered 10,000. Starmer is still obsessed with doing this, even though there's no popular support for this in the UK. And then they're trying to kind of rally Europeans, the French. Now with Friedrich Merz in Germany, they might have some buy-in from the Germans for that. The reason is not peacekeeping. The reason is making sure that these agreements with Ukraine stick. And now, given that the only party that's relevant here is the United States, Zelensky reversed himself yet again, and he said, okay, I will sign over these resources to the United States, but no firm commitment, nothing specific, nothing detailed. This is still just at the level of talk. So he will apparently travel to Washington to sign this agreement over. And Trump has said, well, okay, then maybe we'll continue to support you, but I'm convinced that this is Trump trolling Britain, because he knows that Zelensky already signed over these resources to Britain, and that Zelensky can't really, that it's going to become a conflict between the US and Britain. And so I think if this is all true, and I think very likely it is, and reading that agreement makes it sound really plausible, it will be an epic episode of poetic justice, because Britain was the lead in using Ukraine as a proxy in their war against Russia, and now it seems that the Trump administration is turning it around and using Ukraine as a proxy in their attack on the United Kingdom. And there's no doubt who's going to win, because the United Kingdom is completely painted itself into a corner. They have no force of their own to enforce anything at all. They're in desperate financial and economic straits. And Keir Starmer's government is desperately unpopular and probably won't last for much longer. So it's looking like curtains for Britain. And I think we're going to find out much more about this in the next few weeks.
Alex, how much of what's going on in the United Kingdom in terms of their economy and the situation they're facing right now is related to what's going on in Ukraine and their gamble in Ukraine?
I think it has everything to do with it, because the Keir Starmer's turn for Orwellian authoritarianism started last July. I think it was 29th July, when you had the stabbings of 3 young girls in Southport, UK. And he used that incident, which was probably staged, to step up the repression of the British people, against the British people. And they started enacting all these new hate speech laws, censorship. They're accelerating their move to digital ID, to banking controls. They will make it exceedingly easy for British banks to unbank individual Britons. Let's call it an industrial strength version of what Canadian banks have done to the trucker protesters a few years ago. This all started happening at the very same time when Ukraine defaulted on their debt obligations to Western financial institutions. So on 31 July, Zelensky declared default for all practical purposes, suspension of repayments of foreign debts, which was effective 1st of August. And there had already been several weeks of negotiations about these repayments. The Western financial institutions gave Ukraine a 2-year grace period for an amount of about $20 billion. And then that grace period expired on 1st of August. And then they had to rush a few $billion from the European Union, which was paid out by the Council of Europe. And so it's a big, massive mess. It's very difficult to read because obviously the information is being concealed. But in the UK, we had two very, very significant changes that took place last summer. So we're talking late July. The repression, the Southport stabbings, the changes in the Bank of England rules all happened about at the same time. And the change of Bank of England rules are, this is not something that people discuss over coffee in bars, but it's very relevant because the Bank of England decided to radically loosen the credit standards for collateral that they accept in exchange for liquidity, meaning in exchange for cash that they give to, firms, pension funds, banks, banking institutions, and so forth. Meaning that they lowered the credit standards. And so, usually central banks will extend liquidity in exchange for, let's call it no risk collateral. Well, what they did is pretty much they did away with all that and announced that they would be accepting a much broader range of assets, which probably means that they will start accepting toxic sludge as good collateral to extend liquidity to counterparties at pound for pound basis. Which very likely, this was never spelled out in any of their press releases and documents, but it pretty much means that probably people who got stuck with Ukraine bonds can pledge them to the Bank of England and get pound for pound liquidity, essentially free money. Now, what that does is downstream, it's going to end up causing inflation. And the British people are already at the brink. It's the economic situation is dismal. The poverty is through the roof. Massive amount of families and children live below the poverty line. Unemployment is sky high. The GDP is next to dead. I think that in 2020, in the last quarter of 2024, the real GDP growth in the United Kingdom was 0.1%. It's the worst performing economy in G7. And I think that much of this is largely due to a few idiotic strategy directions by the British government, but in large part also because they are very, very heavily invested in Project Ukraine. And now that whole thing is turning into a very bad investment. And so it's going to impact the British economy, and it's going to impact the standard of living of the British people. So, in this situation, you could lose control of the society. You could end up with a revolution on your hands. And so to preempt this, the government has to rapidly roll out this Orwellian repression system where they end up giving themselves the ability to put anybody away for pretty much any kind of offense. But they are most concerned with quote unquote hate speech, with censoring free speech, and from making it near impossible for the British people to assemble and protest. And so they are really truly in desperate straits. And I think if they continue in this direction, they're going to make North Korea look like a libertarian democracy by comparison.
What I don't understand about the position of the United Kingdom is they're talking about putting troops on the ground, and while as you've mentioned, Donald Trump is not interested in doing that, and he knows that that would not practical to talk about. And
Yeah, and I'm sorry to interrupt your question, but this is exactly where we get to the question of having a government of savvy operators versus having a government of morons and degenerates. So if you had Kamala Harris in the White House, Keir Starmer would charm her with his British accent and these empty slogans and stories about alliance, liberal values, shared values, blah blah blah. And Kamala Harris would probably, and her her cabinet would sign off on whatever Keir Starmer wanted. And when they face Donald Trump and Scott Bessent and Marco Rubio, and okay, so Marco Rubio is maybe not the savviest of operators, but there's a number of people in Trump's team who are very, very sophisticated thinkers. I read a paper by I forget his first name, Miran, who is the nominee for Trump's Council of Economic Advisors. So if you read this paper, you really, really need to put your thinking cap on, and you realize that this is a very, very sophisticated person with very extensive, deep, detailed knowledge of how the economic and financial systems work. They can do cost-benefit analysis. If you compare that to the former chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors under Biden, his name was Jared Bernstein. He's a certifiable moron. You could, I think you can still find his statement on YouTube where he's displaying a shocking level of ignorance about exactly his domain of supposed expertise. He has no idea how the Federal Reserve functions, how the U.S. Treasury issues bonds, where inflation comes from, and all this. And so he launches into this statement that is so completely incoherent that you would berate a child if they say this. You would say, like, go and read up on this material. You have no idea what you're talking about. But here you have the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, a complete moron. I'm sorry to use that word, but I really can't use a more charitable word for this. And so if you bring the lawyer, knight of the British Empire, Sir Keir Starmer, in front of people like this, very easy to dazzle them, and you would have a very different outcome. And if they said, we'll put 10,000 troops in if you commit 20, 30, 50, and then the Germans will put in some, and then the French will put in some, and then the Romanians and the Poles and the Baltic states, and we'll assemble a whole army, and we'll have a peacekeeping operation in Ukraine, and we'll make sure, well, they wouldn't say this, but what they want to make sure is that those resources of Ukraine that they need as collateral for Western banking system remains under our control, and that we can defend them by the force of arms. When they come to Trump, Trump is going to say, well, this is costing us a lot. What's the benefit? You have nothing to offer. On the other hand, Russians are offering us quite a lot, and they have a whole lot more of these rare earth minerals and pipelines and natural gas and oil and whatever you want. So we can do deals with Russia, and it'll be profitable for them and for us. For you, we have massive debts. We have huge expenses to maintain this Ukraine project alive. And there's no certainty of positive outcome because the Russians are winning the war. So that's the cost benefit analysis. So I think it's relatively easy to predict that Keir Starmer won't achieve anything in Washington either.
What's so interesting about the talks in Saudi Arabia that when you hear the both parties are talking about those talks, it seems that the issue of Ukraine was a minor issue to talk about.
Yes.
They were talking about a lot of things that Ukrainian conflict was this little thing on the table that nobody would care about.
Yes, exactly. And I think that what appears as a transactional approach by the Trump government, and it's easy for people to convince themselves that this is Trump in a nutshell because he was this real estate developer and he wants to cut deals and make profits and win. He wants to always win. It's very easy to think in those terms, but I think that his policies are deeply strategic with a very very long-term view, and the objective is nothing less than to completely overhaul the global system of governance, to move away from the post-World War II global order. And we know this because Marco Rubio pretty much explicitly said that during his confirmation hearings on the 15th January this year. He said explicitly that the post-World War II order is obsolete. He said that it's more than obsolete. He said that it is presently being used as a weapon against us. So there's no question that first, Marco Rubio didn't invent this himself. So he was speaking on behalf of the government of Donald Trump. And second thing is it confirms that they're completely serious about rejecting the post-World War II order and developing a different one. So who are you going to talk about the new world order? You're not going to talk to the Brits. You're not going to talk to the Ukrainians. You're going to be talking to the Russians and to the Chinese. And this is what I think is the agenda of the following, the foreign policy agenda of the 4 years of Donald Trump. The transactional aspect of this, feeding frenzy over Ukraine's resources is, I think, narrative for distraction. For distraction of the not so much the public, but maybe the European leadership and mainstream media. But the real deals are being discussed about the next global order.
Alex, do you feel that the United States and Russia are trying to define the future of Ukraine based on some sort of economic transaction that can happen between the two countries, even Ukraine being involved in that? But Ukraine, at the end of the day, would be under some sort of neutral condition, as we see in Austria, and they're not going to be. How do you see the way that the two countries are trying to picture the situation in Ukraine? How can Ukraine be part of this deal between the United States and Russia while having their benefits in place?
I think that what they will be discussing over the coming months is much, much bigger in scope than peace in Ukraine. I think that the peace in Ukraine is making itself. in the form of Ukraine's defeat. When Donald Trump states that, okay, well, perhaps we're going to continue supporting Ukraine for another while if Zelensky signs over these resources over to us, he's actually helping Russia. Because what does that mean? It means no ceasefire. He's not pressuring the Russians to accept a ceasefire thing. Russia is winning on the ground. It doesn't matter how many F-16s or anti-aircraft missiles the United States delivers to Ukraine. It's the continuation of war is helping Russia because the front line is moving westwards. So it's putting Russia in a much better negotiating position for whatever comes with the armistice. I think that Donald Trump and his government, they want to focus on Western Hemisphere. I think they want to fall back on some form of their Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine, it may seem like an imperialistic impulse on the part of U.S. government, but it actually puts the Americas off limits to European colonialist powers. It says Britain, France, Spain, Portugal, Belgium, this is our backyard, stay out. We have the ultimate arbitration say in what gets done here. Now, how the relations with Brazil, Argentina, Mexico, Colombia, Venezuela evolve, that's a different question, and I hope that the relations will be constructive and cooperative rather than imperialistic and colonialist. Eastern Europe will probably come under Russian sphere of influence, whether people like the Poles and the Czechs and the Baltic states like this or not. This is how it is, and there's precious little they can do about this. And then East Asia will be under China's dominance. And I think that the new world order will evolve as a multipolar order, but based on three large blocks, which will be the Western Hemisphere under US hegemony or dominance, Europe under Russian dominance, East Asia as under Chinese dominance, and then there will be, regional powers like India, Iran, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, that will have their own spheres of influence. This is all fine if the objective is to usher an era of world peace. And then each one of these regional powers becomes a guarantor of peace in their region. Because the world order that we have had so far for the last couple of centuries has been the continuation of British geopolitics, where the general idea was divide and conquer. So you were constantly pitting nation against nation, kept them almost permanently in hostilities and wars in order to be able to dominate them with provision of weapons and credit. So if you are the world's leading supplier of weapons and the world's leading supplier of financial support, then keeping everybody at war all the time is the best thing possible for you, because it makes it very easy to control governments everywhere by giving them credit and giving them weapons so they can fight their rivals and so that they can pay the cost of maintaining their governments. And this approach to policy has landed us in these permanent wars. So a different turn that is being made by the Trump administration uh, gives hope that we will turn this page of history, and that there's going to be a very, very different world order that's going to be based on peace and on commercial cooperation between nations. And Trump has actually spoken in those terms. I think he called it an empire of commerce, if something to that effect. So if that's the mindset, then that should give us a cause for optimism. The the day-to-day news from the Middle East, from Eastern Europe, from Western Europe, I think this is all noise. I think this is all part of the Trump's management style, where he provides a lot of distraction, gives a lot of red meat to the punditry and the commentariat to get lost in. But if we look at the effect of these moves, we see that the bombs stopped falling on Gaza. Humanitarian aids went in to Gaza. He's talking to the Russians, which is very difficult to overestimate the importance of this. In 2019, former German Foreign Minister Sigmar Gabriel said that this is by far the most important thing determining peace in the world, the relationship between Russia and the United States. And the fact that Biden administration completely blew up that bridge and didn't even speak to the Russians for 3 years is it's put us at risk of slip sliding into a nuclear war. And that same thinking was completely adopted by the European governments. Jeffrey Sachs tried to persuade former European Foreign Minister Joseph Borrell to pick up the phone and talk to the Russians, because we are at risk of sliding into a World War III. And Borrell said, no, we don't talk to our enemies. That's the mindset when you have a government of degenerates and morons. And unfortunately, this is what we still have in Europe. Thankfully, in the United States, the situation has changed radically.
Alex, how do you find the situation in Germany, having these new elections and the new changes that are happening?
I think that Germany has made a sharp 360-degree turn. It's other than the undeniable electoral success of the AfD party. I think we have the continuation of status quo effectively, because it's clear that it's going to be Friedrich Merz who's going to be forming the new German cabinet. He doesn't have the majority, so he'll have to form a coalition. The second most successful party in German election was AfD, but he has already categorically ruled out forming a coalition with AfD. So he has to fall back on Olaf Scholz's SPD and the Greens, maybe. So with the Greens and the SPD, he gets a large majority in the Bundestag. With just the SPD, he gets a slim majority in the Bundestag. They somehow managed to eliminate Sarah Wagenknecht bloc, which is fueling suspicions that the election was rigged. God forbid! How could that possibly happen in our Western democracies? Impossible. But the effect of it all is going to be that you're going to get another term of pretty much exactly the same kind of government that you already had. With I think the only change might be that Friedrich Merz is going to be more aggressive in antagonizing the Russians. Olaf Scholz, for all his rhetoric, was actually quite cautious. vis-a-vis the war in Ukraine and Russia. Friedrich Merz, who is a representative of big capital. He was a lawyer for BlackRock and the chairman of BlackRock in Germany. He has something of a John Foster Dulles as a as a person, as personal qualities, and so his business background predisposes him to aggressively protect Western interest in Ukraine's resources, because BlackRock is heavily invested in Ukraine, and he might be quite willing to risk involving Germany in a big war against Russia. So I think in the end, that's the only thing that's going to change in German policy.
Yesterday, Sergei Lavrov was talking about the western part of Ukraine. This, after many months, this is the first time that he's talking the way that he's talking about the western part, in which he was mentioning that the western part of Ukraine needs to be liberated from racist laws. Here comes the question, Alex, with what's going on in Ukraine, and we know that the western part of Ukraine is practically doesn't it doesn't possess the economy to run the country. The situation would be so dire in the aftermath of a Ukrainian settlement between the United States and Russia. How do you see that playing out for the western part of Ukraine? Are we gonna see some sort of disintegration, collapse, various ethnicities just getting back to, I don't know, Hungary, Poland, Romania, and all of that? Or they're gonna have some sort of autonomy if the government in the western part of Ukraine doesn't abide by, I don't know, by the rule of, I don't human rights, because these ethnicities were facing the same thing that the Russian ethnicities were had in 2014, as you remember. How do you see the situation in the western part of Ukraine in the aftermath of a Ukrainian settlement?
Well, I think it's going to be very complicated, and I think that it's quite plausible that we might see major redrawing of the map in Eastern Europe. There are very significant. There's a very significant of the Polish political class that wants the return of their territories. Like the city of Lvov, or Lviv, as it's called now, and large chunks of Western Ukraine to be reintegrated into Poland. Um, yeah, parts might go to Hungary, parts might go to Romania. Um, this is going to be a crisis flashpoint for Central and Eastern Europe, and it's going to be a destabilization factor for the governments like Poland. Uh, so far, the Russians have been giving mixed messages about this. You had, I think, Dmitry Medvedev, who was, or maybe I got that backwards, but some officials were saying, well, we'll leave Western Ukraine to the Poles and the Romanians and Hungarians. Others were saying, no way, no how. Well, they may never step their foot into Ukraine whatsoever. I think it's going to be a problem for a long time for Europe, unless some kind of a very painful, clear-cut decision is made at some point to simply do away with Ukraine, to carve it up between these other countries. But I think at the moment, given the political environment in Europe, this is about inconceivable. It could be the catalyst for a collapse of the European Union, because this would be completely antithetical to to the founding principles of the European Union. It would be impossible to pretend that this is not happening, and then it would catalyze the end of NATO, but which is already kind of imploding on itself. But for sure, it will potentially destabilize and weaken Poland, and maybe this is part of the Russian game plan, because Poland is one of the strongest antagonists for Russia, but also for Germany. Poland is a real nation, a real power with a real military, and it would probably be a worthy adversary in any conflict. At the same time, Poles have always been, through history, kind of ambitious and aggressive in the conduct of their foreign policy. At the moment, Poland is acting in concert with Great Britain. Radek Sikorski, who is a Polish foreign minister at the moment and who has been in Polish politics for a long time, is actually a British agent. He was educated at Oxford, Pembroke College. He was member of the elite Bullingdon Club by invitation only. He was invited to become member of the Bullingdon Club by none other than Boris Johnson. They're very close, and Poland has a mutual partnership agreement similar to the one with Britain has it with Ukraine, with the UK. And this is outside of the scope of NATO. Both nations are members of NATO, but this agreement is outside of the scope of NATO. So having such an unpredictable and aggressive power in the heart of Eastern Europe might become problematic. So throwing, again, this metaphor of throwing red meat to them in the form of the temptation to acquire Western Ukraine might be a way to distract them and to ultimately weaken Poland. And there's also the issue of refugees, because Poland is now home to, I think, about 2.5 million Ukrainians. If this should happen, then there will be a lot more immigrants coming into Poland from Ukraine, and these immigrants could then be a very, very serious problem. Because one thing to keep in mind is that these let's call them radical nationalists or Banderites from Western Ukraine, they only hate the Poles a little bit less than they hate the Russians. So this is not a friendly relation, and it could be a very difficult issue for Poland to cope with for decades.
Alex, before wrapping up this session, do you think that Poland, since this conflict started, we had a radical attitude on the part of the Polish government toward Russia, and they wanted to put troops underground, if you remember, in when this conflict started and all of that. And right now, they're cooperating with the British government, which is the most radical government, in my opinion, in the European country, in the European among the European countries, both Russia and the situation in Ukraine. But when it comes to Poland, and when they are witnessing what Donald Trump is doing in the United States and what's going on there, and the new policies, do you think that they're gonna reconsider the policy for Russia? Because after all, it seems that I really feel that they can something can happen between Poland and Russia, and just a revolutionizing moment happening between the two countries. if the situation changes the way that we are witnessing right now with Donald Trump? Is that possible, or they're totally connected or tied to the British government and the policies in the United Kingdom?
I think it's possible because Vladimir Putin's government has made a very concerted effort to improve their relations with Poland. They reached out to Poland. Vladimir Putin visited the site of the Katyn massacre, and he officially apologized to Poland for the crimes committed by the Soviet Union in Katyn. You know, for decades after World War II, Katyn massacre was chalked up to the Nazi troops. This was a historical lie, and you know, people in Poland largely know this. And so, setting the record straight, throwing out the lie and admitting the truth and issuing an apology was a very large gesture on the part of Vladimir Putin. And so the relations between Poland and Russia were on the mend, and then all of this collapsed suddenly. You know, there was the incident when I forget what year it was, if it was 2011 or 2012 or 13, but there was a flight of high-level Polish officials who were on their way to Russia to meet with their Russian counterparts, and then the flight crashed in Russia. And I don't know. Strangely, the Western media and public hasn't blamed Russia for this incident, but it did. The brother of Polish President Kaczynski was one of the people on the flight, as well as a number of very high level Polish generals. Either way, the effect was that it immediately chilled the relations between Russia and Ukraine, and then Radek Sikorski came on the scene, and he was recorded in a conversation with another, I think, Polish official by the Polish magazine Wprost, and in which he pretty much revealed that his role was to antagonize Russia and Germany, both powers in their neighborhood. And under Sikorski, he transformed Polish Interior Ministry, Foreign Ministry. I think he was Defense Minister at one point. He turned Polish Foreign Ministry into like a minor globalist power with 100 offices around the world. He's married to the arch neocon Anne Applebaum, and he was very close to the neocons in the Biden administration, as well as to the British foreign establishment. And so I think that this approach to foreign policy got entrenched enough in Poland that it will have to take a major political upset for this to change again. But I think in fullness of time, this could happen, because in essence, there is no reason for the Russian people and Polish people to be enemies. The hostile stance of Poland towards Russia is completely the contrivance of the political class, which is in cahoots completely with the British. And for the British, it's absolutely essential to try to isolate Russia and to prevent Russia from having close, friendly relations with Germany, but also with Poland. And Poland is exactly the buffer between Russia and Germany. So it's very, very important for the British to keep Poland in their orbit.
Thank you so much, Alex, for being with us today. Great
Always good
pleasure
to
as
join
always.
you, Lima. Enjoy Rio, and until the next time.
Thank you. See you. Bye bye.
Take care. Bye bye.